Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, I want you to think about your day so far. Just, run a quick mental scan of the past 24 hours.
Oh, this is always a dangerous exercise.
Right. But think about it. You haven't stolen anything from your workplace today.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. You haven't lied to your spouse or your kids. You haven't committed any scandalous acts of violence against your neighbor.
Kept your hands to yourself.
Exactly. You haven't defrauded anyone.
Yeah.
And you look at that track record, and, well, you feel pretty good about yourself, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we all do this.
We constantly evaluate our moral standing, and we tend to operate with a very specific and quite convenient type of scorecard.
A very forgiving scorecard.
Yeah, we build an entire architecture of self-justification on a foundation of absence. Like, we evaluate our goodness almost entirely by the bad things we have not done.
Right. We congratulate ourselves for the empty spaces on the page. The places where a transgression could have been, but we avoided it.
Yes, we define holiness as just the successful avoidance of trouble. Well, today, on this deep dive, we are taking a massive theological hammer to that specific scorecard.
And it is a heavy hammer.
It really is. We are conducting an extensive verse-by-verse examination of a single, honestly devastating sentence found in the New Testament. It's James chapter 4, verse 17.
Yeah, and we are pulling material today from two incredibly thorough theological texts. One is called The Sin of Knowing and Not Doing, and the other is The Tragedy of Inaction.
And the jarring reality we're going to confront together, the real mission of this deep dive, is this question. What about the good things you knew to do, the specific righteous actions that were staring you right in the face, but you consciously chose to leave undone?
Yeah, that is the precise question that just shatters all of our comfortable illusions.
It really does. So what's the game plan for how we're going to break this down?
Well, the premise of our conversation today is to walk through a very deliberate, systematic progression to understand why this specific verse in James is so devastating to human pride.
Okay, I like it. Where do we start?
We will begin by looking at the specific audience James was addressing in the first century. We need to see who these scattered early Christians were, what they were doing with their lives, and why they were guilty of this specific type of inaction.
Makes sense. Context is king.
Always. And from there, we will analyze the precise Greek terminology James chose to use, because the vocabulary of this verse leaves absolutely no room for evasion.
I'm looking forward to that part.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Then we will look at how the Westminster Shorter Catechism defines the very nature of sin, placing omission right at the forefront of the discussion.
Which is going to surprise a lot of people.
I think so. And finally, we will see how this single verse dismantles all of our self-righteousness. It leaves us with no other refuge but to look directly to the perfect active obedience of Jesus Christ.
So the text forces a total reevaluation of how we understand our standing before a holy God.
That's the goal.
Okay, before we even get into the first century context of who James was writing to, I think we need to clearly define the core theological problem that the sources present.
Right, getting our definition straight.
Yeah, and the core problem is humanity's false definition of holiness. The text point out a massive flaw in human nature.
Which is that we measure righteousness by the evils we manage to avoid.
Exactly. I mean, we look at the Ten Commandments, for instance, and we focus so heavily on the thou shalt nots.
Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery.
Thou shalt not steal.
No.
And because we haven't done those things today, we think we are in the clear.
We think we're doing great.
Right. But James 4.17 comes in and declares that biblical holiness is not just sitting still and keeping your hands to yourself.
No, it's the active, relentless pursuit of righteousness. It is doing the good you know you ought to do.
It is. And to really grasp the absolute weight of this, I know the sources look at how Reformed theology defines sin.
Right. They do, yeah. They bring in the Westminster Shorter Catechism, specifically question 14.
Oh, I love the catechism.
It's so good. For those familiar with it, you know the brilliance of its brevity. The question simply asks, what is sin?
And the answer?
The answer provided by the Westminster Divines is, sin is any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God.
Okay, let's pause and look at the specific sequence of those words.
Yeah, notice what comes first. The framers of the Catechism deliberately placed want of conformity, which is the theological term for omission, before transgression.
And transgression is the term for commission, actively breaking a rule.
Right. Failing to conform to the positive commands of God is listed first.
That feels intentional.
Highly intentional. The texts argue that this want of conformity is equal in guilt, equal in its rebellion, and equal in its offense against a holy God as actively breaking his prohibitions.
That is wild to think about. We tend to think of sin as a line we step over.
Yes, but the Catechism points out that sin is also a failure to step up to the line God has drawn.
I want to push back on that a bit, or at least press into that concept, because this is a really tough pill for the human ego to swallow.
Oh, absolutely. It's completely counterintuitive to how we operate.
Right. So does this mean that sitting quietly, just kind of keeping your head down, staying out of trouble, and minding your own business is actually a moral negative rather than a neutral middle ground?
According to the text, yes.
It makes me think of taking a standardized test back in school. Like you were taking the SATs, you come across a really difficult math question, and you decide to just leave the answer blank.
Because you don't want to get penalized for guessing wrong.
Exactly. But you don't get partial credit for avoiding writing down the wrong answer. A blank space on the Scantron is still a 0.
That's a great way to look at it.
It still counts against your final score. Is that the mechanism we are talking about here? That a blank space in our moral life, a moment where we just do nothing, is actually a 0 that counts against us?
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Yes, the blank space is a 0. In the eyes of God's holy law, there is absolutely no such thing as a neutral, inactive middle ground. You are either actively conforming to the character of God or you are failing to conform.
There's no sitting on the fence.
None. And the sources contrast this reformed view with other historical perspectives to show just how radical this biblical definition actually is.
Okay, what kind of historical perspectives?
For instance, historical Roman Catholic theology often constructed a really complex hierarchy of sins.
Right, mortal and venial sins.
Exactly. Within that system, they categorized many sins of omission as mere venial faults.
Meaning they aren't that big of a deal.
Basically, these were considered minor infractions that do not fundamentally rupture a state of grace or, separate a person from God. It created a system where inaction was seen as a lesser category of failure.
Interesting. And I imagine secular philosophy handles it similarly.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at liberal theology and modern secular philosophy, they tend to view inaction as a perfectly acceptable, completely harmless middle ground.
Like the whole do no harm thing.
Yes. The secular moral framework is essentially the do no harm principle. They promote a morality where as long as you are not actively harming someone, as long as you're not interfering with someone else's autonomy, you are considered a good person.
Right. I'm not hurting anybody, so leave me alone.
Exactly. But the texts we are analyzing state categorically that this inaction is not harmless. It is calculated treason against God.
Treason, that is a strong word.
It is a deliberate refusal to execute the revealed will of the sovereign king. When the king gives a command, ignoring it is not neutrality. It is rebellion.
That reframing completely destroys the idea of the good person who just stays out of the way.
It shatters it entirely.
So this naturally raises a question about the historical context. Who is James actually speaking to that required such a blunt theological hammer?
Yeah, look at the historical setting to see who was guilty of this specific type of inaction.
The sources point out that James, the half-brother of Jesus, often known in church history as James the Just, wrote this letter very early on.
Right, around AD 45 to 49. It's widely considered one of the earliest New Testament writings.
And he was writing to Jewish Christians who were scattered across the Mediterranean in the diaspora.
Yes, these were people who possessed the Torah, they had the writings of the prophets, and they had the ethical teachings of Christ passed down to them.
So they weren't ignorant. They possessed massive theological advantages over the surrounding pagan cultures.
Huge advantages. They were not wandering in the dark. They had the blinding light of divine revelation.
And that covenantal privilege has to be a massive factor in understanding the severity of James's tone. Right?
Oh, absolutely. To whom much is given, much is required.
Yeah.
These early Jewish Christians were existing in a highly mobile world. The Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome, allowed for extensive, relatively safe travel across the Mediterranean basin.
So they were moving around a lot.
Very much so. As a result, many of these believers were engaging in lucrative mercantile trade. They were businessmen, merchants, and entrepreneurs.
Hustlers, basically.
Yeah, first-century hustlers. They were mapping out complex business strategies, deciding which coastal cities to travel to, calculating their anticipated profit margins, and functioning in their daily lives as what the sources call practical atheists.
Practical atheists. That is a fascinating phrase.
It's a crucial term for this discussion. They acknowledged God theologically. I mean, they would have confessed Orthodox monotheism in the synagogue on the Sabbath.
They knew the theology of God's sovereignty.
Right, but they operated their daily itineraries, their commerce, and their material lives with total autonomy. They lived as if God had absolutely no say over their schedules or their bank accounts.
You know, the similarity between these first-century merchants and modern professionals is almost frightening.
It hits very close to home.
We do the exact same thing today. We open our calendar apps, we plot out our next 5 years, we chart our career trajectories, we manage our investment portfolios, and we do it all assuming we are in complete control of the timeline.
We act like we own tomorrow.
We really do. But wait, I need to push back on this on behalf of the listener.
Go for it.
Because the source material also notes that the book of Proverbs constantly praises diligence.
It does.
Proverbs praises the ant for storing up food for the winter. It mocks the sluggard who refuses to plan. And really, the entire New Testament assumes that ordinary work, commerce, and providing for your family is a basic Christian duty.
Yes, if a man won't work, he won't eat.
Right. So the sheer act of making a business plan, the act of buying and selling, is not the sin, right? What is the actual crossing the line moment for these scattered believers?
That's a vital distinction.
Yeah, where does diligence become disobedience?
Commerce, planning, and diligence are not inherently sinful at all. In fact, they are mandated by God.
Okay, so what went wrong?
The crossing the line moment, as detailed in the texts, is the spirit of arrogant self-determination behind the planning.
Ah, it's the attitude.
Yes. The failure is making these plans without public, practical submission to the decree and providence of God. James is targeting the presumption of the human heart.
He's going after their pride.
Exactly. He tells them they knew they should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that.
They knew the theology of divine providence.
They knew it perfectly, but they chose to operate autonomously. They presumed upon tomorrow as if they held the deed to it.
So the good that they omitted, the specific righteous action they left undone, was the humble, conscious, verbal dependence on their Creator.
That's it. They substituted intellectual orthodoxy for active, submissive obedience in their daily affairs.
They thought knowing about God's sovereignty was enough, while living as if they were sovereign over their own lives.
Precisely. That makes perfect sense of the rebuke. They had the right theology in their heads, but it never made it down to their calendars.
So recognizing the specific arrogance of these merchants leads us directly into how James structures his argument in the surrounding text, doesn't it?
Yes, the literary context is everything here. Verse 17 is not just a random proverb dropped out of the sky.
Right, it's not just a standalone fortune cookie.
No, it is a highly strategic conclusion to a very specific argument.
Let's look at that context. James 4.13 through 16 features that direct, biting rebuke of the merchants. He says, "Come now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit.'"
And then verse 17 begins with a very crucial Greek conjunction.
Oh, lay some Greek on us.
The word is oun, which translates to therefore or so.
Okay, so it connects the thought.
It acts as a theological hinge for the entire passage. It connects everything he just said to the devastating conclusion.
That single conjunction carries massive interpretive weight then.
It does. It links the universal maxim of verse 17 back to the specific context of the presumptuous planners. The literary progression James uses is masterful.
Walk us through that progression.
First, he exposes their arrogance by quoting their own business plans back to them.
Kind of holding up a mirror.
Exactly. Second, he dismantles their assumed control by telling them they are ignorant of tomorrow and that their lives are merely a vapor.
A mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes.
Right. Third, he supplies the proper speech of reverent dependence, instructing them that they should say, if the Lord wills.
So he gives them the correction.
He does, and then comes the hinge. Therefore, because he has just instructed them, because they now possess the explicit knowledge of the right thing to do, their failure to do it becomes a culpable offense.
Wow. He corners them logically.
He completely traps them. The flow of the argument moves seamlessly from arrogant plans to creaturely ignorance to humble submission and finally to the guilt of neglected obedience.
And we cannot ignore what comes immediately after this hinge because, honestly, it gets incredibly dark.
It takes a very sharp turn.
The sources highlight that Chapter 5 opens with a terrifying denunciation of rich oppressors. Like, James shifts from talking about merchants making plans to wealthy landowners who are actively defrauding their workers.
Holding back wages, living in luxury while the righteous suffer and die.
Yeah, so verse 17 is really the bridge between Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. It shows a terrifying trajectory.
It does.
The passive omission of God's lordship in your daily planning in Chapter 4 inevitably leads to the active commission of horrific sin against your fellow man in Chapter 5.
That trajectory is vital to understand. James is demonstrating the progressive nature of human rebellion. It always starts quietly.
It's not usually a massive jump off a cliff right away.
No, it starts with a simple, seemingly harmless failure to acknowledge God's sovereignty over your calendar. You just leave God out of the equation for a day.
Just one day.
But that passive omission hardens the heart. It breeds a subtle autonomy that eventually ripens into active, aggressive transgression.
Because when you stop viewing God as the sovereign over your schedule, you eventually stop viewing God as the sovereign over your ethics.
That's exactly the point the texts make. They warn us that isolating verse 17 from this literary context turns it into a generalized, bumper sticker moral proverb.
Right, like just do good things.
Yeah, but when you read it in its proper place, as the bridge between arrogant planning and active oppression, it becomes a devastating indictment of spiritual autonomy. It shows that omission is the soil where commission grows.
Omission is the soil where commission grows. That is heavy.
To fully grasp why James calls this such a damnable offense, we need to look at the precise words he chose to write.
Let's do that. Let's look at the anatomy of omission through the Greek exegesis provided in our sources.
The text is structured as a conditional sentence, utilizing specific Greek participles that are designed to corner the hypocrite.
Like we said, he builds an inescapable linguistic trap.
He really does. The syntax of this verse is brilliant. The text begins with the Greek word eidoti, translated as whoever knows.
Okay, eidoti.
This is a perfect tense participle, and the perfect tense in Greek is highly significant for understanding the psychology of the sin.
Why is that? What does the perfect tense mean here?
It does not describe a fleeting thought, a passing realization, or a quick snapshot of knowledge. It indicates an action completed in the past with ongoing, settled results in the present.
Oh, interesting. So it's locked in.
Think of it like learning to ride a bicycle or learning a language. You don't just know it for a second and then forget it. It becomes a settled reality in your brain.
Right. You can't unlearn how to ride a bike.
Exactly. The person James is addressing has fully internalized the truth. Their failure is not cognitive.
They cannot plead ignorance on the day of judgment.
They absolutely cannot. Their failure is entirely volitional. They know the right course of action, that knowledge is firmly established and resting in their minds, and yet they choose to suppress it.
That makes it so much worse. And what exactly is it that they know?
Well, the word used for good is kalon.
Okay, I love this part. The sources draw a fascinating contrast here that completely shifted how I view this verse.
It's a beautiful distinction.
Because James could have used the word agathon, right? Which just refers to basic utilitarian moral goodness.
Right, just standard good versus bad.
Or he could have used dikaion, which means righteous, or just in a strict legal sense. But he chose kalon.
He did.
And this word means that which is beautiful, excellent, noble, and aesthetically perfect. It is the highest possible ideal of virtue.
It's not just the right thing to do. It is the beautiful thing to do.
Yes. That choice of vocabulary elevates the entire discussion from a legal courtroom to a grand masterpiece.
It means the will of God is not an arbitrary, burdensome set of rules designed to restrict human joy.
Right. It's not God just trying to ruin our fun.
Far from it. The commands of God are the most beautiful, excellent path a human being can walk. God's law reflects God's character, and God's character is the definition of beauty.
Thinking of God's commands as kalon changes everything about how we approach obedience.
How so? How do you visualize it?
Well, it's not about viewing the law as an annoying set of chores you have to check off a list before you can go out and play.
Right.
It's not about avoiding getting in trouble with a strict headmaster. It's more like being invited to participate in a flawless, sweeping symphony.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, think about it. God is the composer and the conductor. The sheet music is his law. Refusing to play your instrument or refusing to come in when the conductor points to your section isn't just breaking a sterile rule.
No, you're ruining the song.
You are. It is a desecration of beauty. You are ruining the harmony of the music. You are introducing dissonance. into a masterpiece.
That symphony analogy captures the essence of Kalon perfectly. To fail to do the Kalon is a spurning of divine excellence.
It's looking at the masterpiece God is orchestrating and deciding your silence is preferable to his harmony.
And that brings us to the action itself, or, well, rather, the lack thereof.
The actual omission part.
Right. The text says, and fails to do it. The word for doing is koiunti.
Koiunti, okay.
And this is in the present tense. In Greek, the present tense indicates a continuous, habitual, ongoing action.
So it's not a one-off mistake.
No, James is not addressing a single momentary lapse in judgment where someone got distracted and forgot to do a good deed. He is targeting a habitual lifestyle of passive rebellion.
Wow.
It is a continuous, settled failure to execute the beautiful good.
Which leads to the final, crushing verdict of the verse. The word used for sin here is hamartia.
Yes, hamartia.
The continuous failure to do the beautiful good is hamartia. Now, this is the most common New Testament word for sin, and we often hear that its root meaning is an archery term, right? To miss the mark.
That's the classic Sunday school definition.
Yeah, but as the texts explain, missing God's mark is not an innocent mistake where you just didn't pull the bowstring back far enough or the wind caught your arrow.
Wow. Missing this mark is cosmic treason.
There is that word again.
The sources point out that James could have used a word like parabasis, which specifically means to step over a line or actively break a negative command.
But he didn't.
He didn't. By utilizing the broader, more encompassing term, hamartia, James establishes the absolute theological principle that sin encompasses far more than active transgression.
It's the fundamental failure to hit the mark of God's perfection in every single area of life.
This completely destroys the idea that believers are somehow free from the moral imperatives of God's law once they are saved.
The whole antinomian idea.
Right. Grace does not make obedience optional. Grace demands conformity to the Kalon.
Now, if failing to do the beautiful good is a continuous sin, I can imagine you, the listener, might be feeling a bit paralyzed right now.
I wouldn't blame them.
Because I know I'm feeling the weight of it. We had to address the boundaries of this command, or else we will be crushed under the psychological weight of it.
We definitely need some guardrails here.
Yeah. Our sources pull out three main pillars from the text to help us handle this: the prerequisite of knowledge, the tragedy of inaction, and the verdict of heaven.
Let's take those one by one.
That first point, the prerequisite of knowledge, is crucial because God holds people accountable for the light they actually possess.
This goes back to the Greek. The perfect participle idoti protects us from endless guilt over things we didn't know.
Right. This point is pastoral as well as theological. It confronts the false assumption of the sluggard who thinks ignorance is bliss, while simultaneously protecting the tender conscience of the believer who wants to please God, but feels overwhelmed by the suffering in the world.
That's a vital balance to strike.
It is, because I have to ask a pastoral question here based on this text.
Lay it on me.
Does this verse demand omniscience and omnipresence from us? Like, am I committing a sin right now at this very second because I am not simultaneously feeding the poor in another country, evangelizing my neighbor across the street, visiting the prisoners downtown, and praying for the persecuted church in another hemisphere, all while sitting here recording this conversation?
That is a recipe for a nervous breakdown.
Right. Is the law of God demanding infinite capacity from a finite creature? Because if it is, we are all in a state of perpetual, unavoidable sin every second of the day, just by virtue of being in one place at one time.
The source texts explicitly relieve this perfectionistic anxiety. The verse does not command creatures to be infinite.
Okay, good. That's a relief.
God knows our frame. You remember that we are dust. The issue at hand in James 4 is known duty.
Known duty?
Yes. It targets the person who has a clear moral duty right in front of them, a specific opportunity for reconciliation with an estranged family member, or a specific moment to show mercy to a coworker in distress.
A specific conversation where the truth of the gospel needs to be spoken.
Exactly. And that person consciously, deliberately walks away. It is not about the millions of things you cannot possibly do because you are finite.
It's about the one thing you know you ought to do today.
The thing God has placed squarely in your path, but you invent a spiritual-sounding excuse to delay doing it?
And that leads to the second pillar, the tragedy of inaction.
This one stings a bit.
It does. The sources note that modern churches are absolutely drowning in theological knowledge, Yet we are starving for practical holiness.
We have endless resources. We have study Bibles, infinite audio series, massive theological libraries, and comprehensive commentaries.
We know the right thing to do better than any generation in history.
We really do.
But the tragedy is the calculated inaction. It is the quiet compromise of the coward who decides that remaining silent is much safer than stepping out in obedience and risking their reputation.
This raises a critical point about the Reformed doctrine of total depravity.
Let's talk about total depravity.
Total depravity does not mean humans are as bad as they could possibly be. People often misunderstand that.
Right, it doesn't mean everyone is basically Hitler.
No, it means that every faculty of the human person, the mind, the emotions, and the will is corrupted by sin.
It's a total spread of the infection.
Exactly. Our nature is so thoroughly compromised that even when our minds clearly apprehend the good, even when we see the Kalon and recognize its beauty, our wills are often paralyzed.
Paralyzed by what?
By lethargy, fear of man, or love of the world. The intellect says go, but the corrupted will says stay.
We convince ourselves that preserving our comfort or maintaining a pristine reputation is more valuable than executing the will of God.
We delay obedience. We tell ourselves we will reconcile tomorrow, or we will speak the truth when the cultural climate is more convenient.
But as James previously established with the arrogant merchants, tomorrow does not belong to us. Delayed obedience is frequently just disguised disobedience.
Wow. Yes. Delayed obedience is disguised disobedience.
So what does this all mean for us? Where does this leave the listener? By this point, anyone listening should feel the absolute crushing weight of a law.
If they're paying attention, they should.
Every single person has known to do good and failed. We have all walked past the specific duty right in front of us. Our scorecard is covered in blank spaces that, as we've established, are actually zeros.
A lot of zeros.
We need a theological solution, and we need it desperately, because if this deep dive stops here, we are left with zero hope.
We're just left in despair.
Right. The sources are clear that James 4.1 said exposes a massive human inability. The strictness of this text must drive us directly to the active obedience of Jesus Christ.
If we stop at the condemnation of the law, we are left with nothing but terror. The law provides a mirror. It shows us our exact spiritual condition, but a mirror cannot wash your face.
That's a great saying. A mirror cannot wash your face.
It cannot provide salvation. The demands of James 4.17 require flawless, continuous execution of the beautiful good from the moment of birth to the moment of death.
And only one man in the history of the cosmos has ever achieved that. The God-man, Jesus Christ.
This is where Reformed theology shines by drawing a crucial distinction between Christ's passive obedience and his active obedience.
Let's break those terms down, because understanding the difference between passive and active obedience is the key to resting in the gospel, rather than panicking over our omissions.
Passive obedience refers to Christ's suffering and death on the cross. The word passive here comes from the Latin passio, meaning suffering. By willingly submitting to the crucifixion, he paid the penalty for our sins. He absorbed the wrath of God and washed away our guilt, including the massive accumulation of guilt from our daily omissions.
So he took the punishment for every blank space on our scorecard.
He did. But active obedience refers to Christ's flawless, lifelong execution of every single good thing demanded by the Father.
From his birth to his death.
Yes. He perfectly fulfilled the positive commands of the moral law. He always knew the kalon, the beautiful good, and he never once failed to perform it. His will was never paralyzed by fear or lethargy.
I want to visualize this. Let's move away from standard theological metaphors and think about an incredibly high-stakes, perilous mountain climbing expedition.
Okay, I'm with you.
Imagine the summit of Mount Everest represents the absolute perfection of God's law, the flawless execution of the kalon. We are all supposed to reach the summit.
But we haven't.
No. Because of our sin, not only have we failed to climb, we've actually fallen into a massive, freezing, inescapable crevasse at the very bottom of the mountain.
We're trapped.
We are trapped, freezing to death, crushed by the weight of our own failures and omissions. Now, passive obedience is the rescue team rappelling down into the dark, pulling us out of the crevasse, and saving us from imminent death.
Okay.
We are no longer going to die in the pit. The debt is paid. But here's the problem. Pulling us out of the pit doesn't put us at the summit.
Right. You're just back at the start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are just sitting at base camp, freezing and unqualified. Active obedience is Jesus Christ scaling the sheer cliff face of the mountain flawlessly.
Ah, I see.
He never misses a handhold. He never takes a wrong step. He braves the absolute worst conditions, reaches the very peak, plants the flag, and then legally and officially transfers the record of his flawless ascent to our names.
So when the world looks at the record book, it says we climbed the mountain.
Yes, that's the imputation of righteousness.
That mountaineering analogy is brilliant for illustrating the doctrine of imputation. The imputation of Christ's act of righteousness is our only hope of standing before God.
Because we certainly didn't climb it ourselves.
No, we didn't. The sources list magnificent, concrete examples of Christ fulfilling the demands of James 4.17 during his earthly ministry.
Oh, share some of those.
When Christ saw the multitudes hungry and harassed, he did not omit compassion. He fed them and taught them.
He actively did the good.
Yes. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when facing the unimaginable agony of the impending cross, he possessed perfect knowledge of the Father's will. The horror of what was coming was entirely clear to him.
And yet, he did it.
He did it. He did not say tomorrow. He did not look for a loophole. He said, "Not my will, but yours be done." He flawlessly executed the most difficult known duty in the history of the world.
Praise God for that.
Therefore, when the Father looks at the elect, he does not see our thousands of daily omissions. He does not see our cowardice. He sees Christ's perfect, unblemished record of fulfilling the beautiful good.
The summit is credited to us.
The summit is credited to us.
And because Christ has completely fulfilled the law on our behalf, believers are freed to actually obey it out of gratitude. The paralyzing pressure to earn salvation is gone.
That's the beauty of grace.
It brings us to what the Reformers call the third use of the law. Using the law not as a condition for salvation, but as a faithful guide for Christian living.
Now we can actually look at James 4.17, not be crushed by it.
Right. Let's bring this application into the 21st century. The sources call for genuine repentance regarding our specific modern omissions.
Delaying obedience until our lives feel settled or until the cultural temperature cools down is a sin, because, as James said just a few verses earlier, life is a vapor.
We don't have time to wait for optimal conditions.
We vehemently reject the pragmatism and quietism of our current age.
Define those terms for us. Pragmatism and quietism.
Pragmatism tells us to only do the good that yields immediate, visible results. Like, if it doesn't work, don't do it.
Okay, and quietism.
Quietism tells us to retreat entirely and just maintain personal piety while the world burns.
Just hide in a bunker.
Exactly. The sources provide very specific modern applications to jolt the reader awake. Sitting next to a lost coworker in an office or a family member at Thanksgiving and remaining entirely silent about the gospel simply out of fear of not being considered culturally acceptable, that is a stark failure to do the known good.
It is choosing personal comfort over the eternal state of a neighbor.
That's exactly what it is.
It's fascinating how the authors of these texts apply this very sharply to our current cultural moment.
Yeah.
They point out specific areas where they believe the church is remaining silent out of cowardice.
Yeah, they do get very specific.
For instance, they argue that failing to defend biblical definitions of marriage and gender in the public square, or staying quiet when ideologies like critical race theory or liberal theology enter the church, are clear sins of omission.
Yes. The source material explicitly calls those things out.
And just to be clear for the listener, we are just imparting the examples provided by the authors of these texts. We aren't necessarily endorsing these specific political or cultural viewpoints ourselves right now, but rather reporting how the authors apply James 4.17 to modern issues.
Exactly. We're conveying their application. They frame it as knowing the truth, but hiding it to keep the peace. The point they're driving home is that hiding your light under a basket to avoid conflict is precisely what James is condemning.
So the core principle they are drawing out there is that truth known must become truth proclaimed and lived. An orthodox mind paired with a silent tongue is a tragedy.
Well said.
So the inevitable question arises for the believer who feels the conviction of this text. How do we actually overcome this spiritual lethargy?
That's the million-dollar question.
Do we just need to grit our teeth, try harder, set earlier alarms, and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps? Or are we supposed to look inward, empty our minds, and wait for some special, mystical feeling before we act?
Because I know my own heart, and relying on my own willpower usually lasts about 3 days before I am back to scrolling on my phone and ignoring my responsibilities.
Same here. It fades so fast.
The sources vehemently reject mysticism and emotionalism. We do not need to wait for a private impression, a shiver down our spine, or a secret revelation to obey clear commands already printed in Scripture.
We already have the orders.
We do. The solution provided by Reformed theology is a steadfast, disciplined reliance on the ordinary means of grace.
Let's unpack the ordinary means of grace, because that can sound like abstract theological jargon to someone who hasn't grown up hearing it.
Sure. It refers to the basic, everyday instruments God uses to strengthen the faith of his people.
What's the first one?
First, it means sitting consistently under rigorous, expository preaching of the Word. This is how God continually illuminates our minds and corrects our false scorecards.
Okay, getting into the Word. What's the second?
Second, it means partaking in the Lord's Supper by faith. This isn't an empty ritual, it is spiritual nourishment for the soul, bringing to mind the active and passive obedience we just discussed.
It's fuel for the journey.
Yes. And third, it requires fervent, continuous prayer, specifically asking the Holy Spirit to apply the accomplished work of Christ to our stubborn, lethargic wills.
We have to ask for the strength to do it.
We do not overcome inaction by seeking extraordinary signs in the sky. We overcome it by faithfully engaging with the ordinary means God has already instituted to conform us to the image of his Son.
So to recap this massive conversation,
Let's pull it all together.
the law of God, specifically James 4:14, functions as a devastating mirror. It shows us our complete failure to do the known good.
It proves that our blank spaces are actually zeros.
Right, and that our inaction is a calculated rebellion against a sovereign king. But that very mirror forces us to stop looking at ourselves and to run as fast as we can to the cross.
Where we find our substitute.
Yes, where we find that Jesus Christ perfectly scaled the mountain on our behalf. He executed the beautiful good flawlessly, and his active obedience covers our massive deficit.
And because we are secure in that grace, because our record is clean and our summit is guaranteed, we are completely free to step out, rely on the ordinary means of grace, and start obeying today. The good is known. The time to obey is now. We must rise from forgiven knees to do the next known good.
I want to leave you with a final idea to chew on, something to take with you as you look at your schedule for the coming week. Think about a day you usually consider boring or completely uneventful.
Standard Tuesday.
Yeah, a day where nothing bad happens, you don't get into any arguments, but nothing particularly noteworthy happens either. If sin includes the good we omit, then an uneventful day isn't morally neutral at all. It might actually be the loudest, most intense battleground of your faith. When you realize that inaction is a choice, it completely reshapes how you look at the empty spaces on your calendar tomorrow.